Hello, my name is Siddi. I'm doing an interview here for the Sierra Leone Liberia Heritage Project. What's your name, please?
Dorothy Kuya.
Dorothy, can you tell us a bit about your West African heritage?
Well, it's a double one in one sense. My father's from Sierra Leone, and his name was Ebenezer Foster Jones. I only ever met him once in my life, but my mother eventually married a Nigerian called Joseph Oyo Kuya, and he legally adopted me and gave me his name. But I've always known about my Sierra Leone heritage, and I did make some contact with the family some years ago when I was working in London.
Oh, that's so wonderful to know that you. That means you enjoy two of the greatest West African countries, Nigeria and Sierra Leone. But do you know Sierra Leone is the first British colony in West Africa, not Nigeria?
Well, from what I understand, the history is that Sierra Leone was a very early um, colony in a sense, because the British and the Americans were looking for somewhere, they had control of it, and they were looking for somewhere to get rid of all these free slaves they had in America and Britain. And so they managed to carve out some of the land there from the indigenous peoples
Yeah, that's true.
and sent people over or encouraged them to go to Sierra Leone. And there's quite a history of the way they tried to force black people who were born in Britain to go to Sierra Leone.
At that time.
And there was an amazing, I've got quite a lot of material about that history. They had 3 boats available, the British government, and were encouraging free slaves or people who'd been freed from slavery or had come into the country as free people to go to Sierra Leone.
That's wonderful to know. So, what's your experience being someone from both West African heritage and English heritage?
Well, it's been the typical one, I think, is that in the end this society in Britain judges people by their colour and by their appearance and by their class background. So even though I was born here, my mother was born here, my mother was white, and she's of European background. Nevertheless, I was always treated, well, I reckon I was treated unfairly, discriminated against, because colour became a major factor. And sometimes people said that. I'm old enough now, at 80, to remember the days when they actually openly said, we don't take colour people here.
Wow.
For jobs, for housing, for everything. And I know my parents had great difficulty when trying to find decent accommodation and getting accommodation because my father was black. And of course my mother had 2 children to him, so there were 3 black children.
Wow. This is an interesting story here. So, have you ever made an effort to also know about your Sierra Leone heritage? Because you definitely know about your Nigerian heritage, no doubt about
Well, I
that.
know about I've made an effort to know about my Sierra Leone, and when I worked in London, I made contact. I discovered one of my, well, she would have been a cousin, I think, was a famous actress.
Wow.
She acted in Hollywood films. A couple of others were at university in Ireland. I met one of the women who was married to one of my family, and they were very pleasant, but I don't think, they were not very family conscious. And of course, my father was no longer alive. He died some years before. I did hear that he'd married a Nigerian woman, and he had 3 children. He came to Liverpool on one occasion.
Which year was that, you think?
I could work it out, but I was about 12, and it was after the war. And he'd come to England to bring
Which war? Is it the World War One?
Second World War.
Oh, 1945.
I'm not that old.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
Yes, it would have been, I would have been 12, 14, born 1933. So he came because he brought his daughters over to boarding school.
Wow.
And he wanted to take me to school with them. But my parents wouldn't agree, my stepfather and my mother. And, it was a good decision. We were a decent family, we worked hard, and I could understand. I don't regret that. But one thing I do like, and I admire with my mother, she was never in any way bitter. She was always open and frank about the relationship. My father, my biological father, wanted to take her back to Sierra Leone originally when he knew she was having a child, but she refused to go. She was only 19.
Yeah, you
And we're
can't
talking
blame
about
her.
1933. And I think probably her family, she had a sister who looked after her, were discouraging her because they didn't know what Africa was like in those days because they got no information, you know.
Exactly.
But she was never bitter. She was always positive about her father. And my biggest regret, I met him that once, was that I've never had a photograph of him.
Oh my God.
I'd love to have a photograph of him.